All right, every morning I'm on the way. I'm at the airport here in Seattle. Going to fly down to Orange County for a meeting this morning. But I wanted to share with you guys this little video about fiber from microbiome research, which I think is quite interesting.
I think that fiber has gotten a lot of attention for gut health. And I think sometimes people are just, a little bit too focused on fiber and might even push it towards that, upper threshold where they might actually push them into the realm of more GI symptoms. And I actually published a paper 2020 with Jonathan Scholl and Tommy Wood, where we talked about the metabolic flexibility of the gut and how, there's been a lot of focus on fiber historically. And this may be, in part because carbohydrate-rich diets are the natural diets of mice, and those are the animals that are typically used for microbiome research to sort of try and study, physiology. And so what we argued in this paper was that, there's more than fiber that can actually feed our gut. There's more than fiber that can even produce butyrate. A lot of amino acids can lead into butyrate production. And there's also a lot more than butyrate that can feed the gut epithelium. So isobutyrate is a branched chain fatty acid that can feed the gut epithelium. There's also long-chain fatty acids have been shown to feed it as well. Ketones can feed into the same pathway as butyrate. It doesn't really make sense that the rest of our body would be able to deal with fasting or ketogenic diets and adapt, and our gut wouldn't be, right? So, sure. So I do think there's this adaptability to the gut. And so sometimes, if folks are dealing, especially if they're dealing with what you said, they're dealing with small intestinal symptoms, and their small intestine doesn't seem to be able to deal with that excess fiber, it might just mean you need to kind of shift your diet in a different direction, at least for a while, until you can kind of potentially approach that with other root causes to resolve that, or it's possible that even a more animal-based diet might just be right for you, or even for the longer term. So
this is something I've always found it helpful to look at an ancestral lens, and there's that Lord and Cordain Boyd Eaton paper that previewed all the hunter-gatherers, and they didn't find this super strong skewing towards high levels of fiber, high levels of plant intake. I mean, it was better than a highly processed diet fiber-wise, yes, but like so many things, if we look at a ill population who's doing things wrong, we want to go to the extreme opposite. Right. And oftentimes we kind of jump right over what could be the Goldilocks zone of optimal intervention. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that I took away from that paper with some additional thinking was at least some of the early research looking at hunter-gatherers, they were very equatorial in region where they're going to be natively a higher fiber carbohydrate diet. So it seems like that, combined with your commentary on the mouse diets, led to this sort of perfect storm for there to be a little bit of bias in the early research that was super, super sort of fiber-centric.
Yes, definitely. And I will also say that if you've talked to anyone who's gone and lived with the Hadza hunter-gatherers, for example, they really only eat they do eat a fair amount of fruit, but they only eat those like really fibrous, starchy tubers when there isn't meat or honey or fruit available. Right. So it's kind of more of a fallback food for them. And I think, the research also didn't factor in all the soil microbes that they're eating when they consume
and their lifestyle,
unwashed, and their lifestyle, and all those things. So yeah, I think the research got really, really zeroed in on the fiber and has kind of followed that, strongly for a while. And that's not to say that, for some people adding fiber does help with their symptoms, and sure, that might be right for people. But I've kind of tried to back up and say, let's not assume that fiber is, adding fiber is right for everyone. And there's even been studies now to date, the Sonnenbergs did a really great study where they had people increase their fiber consumption or increase their fermented foods. And fiber did nothing to gut diversity, but increasing their fermented foods increase their
would
gut
you
diversity.
Send that paper after? I'd love to
definitely
review. That's great.
Yeah, and even more so, the fermented food consumption had like universal anti-inflammatory effects across all the subjects that they tested. That's not to say that it was healthy individuals. So it's not to say that everyone with a gut issue is going to respond really well to fermented foods. It's not, so I want to make that caveat. But I think the hype around fiber needs to be tempered a little bit.
Oh, amen to that.
All right, so she goes on to talk about how, fiber has largely been kind of overhyped, and we've had this fiber-centric view of the microbiome based upon largely mouse studies and a few sort of equatorial hunter-gatherers. And that's so perhaps our sort of thoughts on the critical nature of fiber are perhaps wrong. And, most people that have done a carnivore diet will probably agree. So a lot of times the science lags behind what's actually found clinically by several decades in many cases. And so one of the things, a couple of the points she makes is that the so-called short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which a lot of people hear about. It's so important and critical for feeding our microbiome. She says, well, clearly that can happen from other ways. Protein, amino acids can do that. Ketones can do that. Methylbutyrate and so on and so forth, that are all derived from non-fiber sources. And so, again, there was, at the end she talks about, an intervention where they compared fiber versus fermented foods with regard to microbiome gut diversity, and showed that the fiber really had basically no effect or minimal effect, whereas fermented foods, and she doesn't specifically say whether it's fermented vegetables or fermented dairy, but my assumption would be probably all the above, could be helpful in that context. And again, I think this is a reasonable look at, obviously our microbiome impacts our body and probably has a reasonably large effect. However, to presume that we know all the interaction of that incredibly complex system, which involves literally trillions of moving parts that are constantly changing. The microbiome is evolving and changing and turning over, by the minute, and it's impacted by just about everything in our environment, every food we consume. So it's wildly premature to speculate that this way is the only way you can have a healthy microbiome, which has been, I think, inconsistent with the experience of many of the people, particularly in the carnivore community, who have seen dramatic improvements in their gut function by excluding fiber in many and most cases. And so, interesting thoughts. Let me know what you guys think about that, about the essentiality of the fiber, clearly it's not essential. Anybody with common sense can see that. I haven't consumed fiber of any significant amount in gosh, almost a decade now, and I'm still here, and so it can't be essential. Now, could it be conditionally beneficial for certain people in certain circumstances? I believe so, absolutely. But does that mean that is the prescription for all people in all conditions at all times? I also don't believe that's true. All right, let me know what you guys think. I gotta go check in on the plane, and we'll talk to you probably sometime later today from California. So we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.